The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit is coming up next week in San Francisco. Leaders of APEC nations will focus their discussions on regional cooperation, on climate change, technology, and supply chains. But there is also much anticipation over high-stakes sideline meetings. For more on what we can expect, we're joined by Schattle, professor of political science at Yonsei University. Welcome to the show, Professor.
Good morning, Kyung-in. Nice to see you.
Good morning. Well, first of all, South Korean President Yoon will be among the leaders attending. What does South Korea have to offer and gain from the summit as it seeks to expand its role in the global green and digital transition fields?
Well, it certainly has technological capacity to offer, I think, and also some export revenue to gain. Just yesterday in the news, we heard that South Korea's expected economic growth for next year has been cut to 2.2%. This is from a KDI report released yesterday. And of course, the country was hoping for a little higher than that, at least 2.3%. So it's very slow growth these days for the South Korean economy. And I'd expect President Yoon to then do as much as he can do to offset this through some external partnerships. And that's fortuitous, actually, given that at the APEC conference this year, one of the big themes is green economy, or clean economy, as many countries are calling it. And the U.S. is also going to be announcing several bilateral initiatives at APEC. The Biden administration is going to be talking about some arrangements with participating countries related to its larger Indo-Pacific economic framework. So again, clean economy, green economy, digital technology, these are areas where we could possibly see something emerging of interest to South Korea along these sorts of lines.
Okay, well, there's also much attention on a possible summit between President Yoon and Chinese President Xi Jinping. What are the prospects of such a meeting and the possible outcome?
Well, it would be a good idea, Kyung-in, and I think it's fairly likely, especially since President Yoon has focused so much of his foreign policy this year, as we well know, on Japan and the United States, and comparatively little on China. Yet it's very important, of course, for Korea to maintain a good relationship with China. Yoon and Xi met at APEC last year in Bali. It was a fairly general meeting. Their points of emphasis at the time were the need to maintain strategic communication, in their words. They also talked about mutual trust. I guess I'd expect something similar this year with the two leaders. And of course, as one of your reports just mentioned a moment ago, one concern is North Korea, always, of course, a perennial concern, but this year more so since North Korean leader Kim Jong-un had the recent summit with Vladimir Putin, and North Korea seems now to be kind of contributing to the Russian war in Ukraine. That's something that I think concerns both South Korea and China. So I would think that would be discussed as well, at least behind the scenes, and we might even hear some sort of report or statement regarding that after they meet. But again, it's hard to say.
Well, President Yoon is also expected to deliver a joint lecture with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. What is the significance of such an event? Normalizing Seoul-Tokyo relations, and what is likely to be their key message?
Right. So this is based on widely disseminated yet still unconfirmed news reports that this event will apparently take place on the 17th at Stanford University, which is, of course, one of the most illustrious universities in the United States. It's located just outside San Francisco. It's often seen as a kind of springboard for so many companies in the high-tech sector. So I think both leaders will be quite keen to visit Stanford and to meet together there. And as you suggest, Kyung-in, I think the two of them will say, especially if they talk at the same event, they'll try to send a message that a new era has arrived between South Korea and Japan. And I would expect they might also say something to the effect that East Asia's democracies are sticking together. Of course, Yoon and Kishida have met a lot this year. They most recently met in September at the G20 summit in New Delhi. Whether they would say anything that's groundbreaking or that charts yet another further step in cooperation between the two countries at this meeting, I'm not necessarily sure. I think they might end up reiterating what they have already been saying. I would actually hope that Prime Minister Kishida would take a few additional steps with regard to try to further public support in South Korea for reconciliation between the two countries. I personally think more is needed from Japan on this side, but we shall see going forward.
Well, we will have to wait and see on that front. Meanwhile, there is also an expected summit between U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping. What is at stake in this highly anticipated meeting?
Yeah, there's a lot at stake here, and in some ways, this is perhaps the most significant two-way meeting we're going to see at the APEC Summit between national leaders. I think, for one thing, Biden and Xi will try to stabilize a tense relationship at a tense moment for world politics. As you know, we're clearly in a new era of great power rivalry at the moment, and the potential for further conflict in East Asia is certainly high. There's a lot of chatter about that kind of concern these days at conferences. In fact, of course, China's claims to Taiwan and the unresolved, uneasy peace between the two Koreas are constant flashpoints in both regional politics here and world politics. So Xi and Biden want to lower, I think, the risk of any potential crisis in the region. I think ultimately the two leaders realize that their two countries are highly interdependent and can't afford any kind of escalation into conflict. And regarding the U.S. and China also, there's some bad blood still over the U.S. downing in February of the alleged spy balloon from China that floated over the United States. You might remember the news stories about that at the time. So I think the two leaders might try to smooth that over, and they might also talk about some of the accusations that we've been hearing on the part of the U.S. and its allies. We heard this especially at the G7 meeting in the spring in Japan, that Beijing is guilty of economic coercion, in the words of the U.S. and several of its allies, pressuring other countries to follow policies of its own, China's policies of its own. So I think the two leaders might try to sort that out. And lastly, Xi will be eager to talk to the U.S. and also its partners at this meeting, because China recently reported its first ever quarterly deficit in foreign direct investment in recent years. So China's trying to get its own economic engines revved up again, and I think they'll be using the summit as an opportunity to try to do just that.
All right, Professor, we will have to wrap it up here. Always thank you for your insight.
Great. Thank you for having me, Kyung-in. Take care.